live. So just give it a minute. Here we go. Jealous today. Oh no, there we go. Hello. This is where I sing my hold music. Yeah, I've just started getting some cheesy saxophone. I should just sit here on like it's a toy saxophone. Enjoyment. That's all right. Kia ora, welcome people who are gathering. We're just going to give it a minute to see who else is leaping in. I know sometimes the sub-state takes a minute. It's a bit of a delay. Becky, we've got 2 of you. Multiples. Grand.
Very appropriate for maths.
Exactly. We'll have multiple people. All right. Kia ora, Tim. I'd be very pleased with me, Tim. I did music this afternoon with some 5-year-olds that have found instruments. That's my music buddy. All right. I'm going to, when that clicks over to 4:32, I'm going to start, and everyone else will just catch up with us, I'm sure. It's always a race to 5 o'clock. So trying to get these things nice and short and sharp. Everybody. Detecting the awkward silence. All right, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa ko Claire Coleman toka ingoa. Kia ora and welcome everybody to today's after school special on Phase 5 Mathematics Statistics. For those of you who are new, I'm just going to outline how it all runs, and then I will introduce my esteemed guest. So, as you know, those of you who've been, we are going to be looking at maths and statistics. We're going to look, I'm going to show you, there are 2 resources that go along with this. I will put the links into the chat. This is the kind of base page, which has clickable buttons that can take you to the snapshot summary, which is what we're going to talk through today, the learning area itself, Phase 5 Mathematics, and the link to the consultation document so that you can do your own survey responses. And then I've outlined some of the questions here so that you can just start thinking about them. And then on the last little bit of this webpage are a few other bits and pieces you might be interested in. An OECD report around maths curriculum, one of the articles around some of the issues about maths curriculum, and also phases 1 to 4. So you might want to have a look and see what came before this phase in terms of phase 1 to 5. It's worth saying again that in terms of context, the phase 1 to 4 maths is out and is the final version, whatever you think of that, as opposed to, as we've discussed, some of the other learning areas where phases 1 to 4 are still in draft. And so it's a that coherence thing is an interesting one. Before I turn to you, Jodie, I also just wanted to say that, as ever with the snapshot resource that I've made, it was contributed to by some other maths expert people, and it's not just Claire's great thoughts, because I am not a maths specialist at all. But again, it was all done very quickly. Consultation closes on the 15th of June. So if you are here in the session, I would urge you to do your consultation document as quickly as possible after this. All right, I would now like to, karakia. I forgot my karakia. My apologies, everybody. Kia hora te marino, kia whakapapa po namo te moana, hei horahi ma tātou I rangi nei, araha atu, araha mai, tātou e tātou katoa, hauie tākie. And I will turn to you, Jodie. If you could introduce yourself and just give us your first overview impressions of the Phase 5 mathematics.
Kia ora, I'm Jodie Hunter. I'm a professor of mathematics education at Massey University. So my overview, I think that there is a lot of content in this curriculum, probably I would say an unrealistic amount of content to be taught to students in the time period that we have to teach them this. It's also very, I think, mislevelled from previous curriculum that we've had with very high expectations, but pulling abstract algebra, for example, into Year 11 mathematics, that has previously been taught at Year 13 in calculus courses. So it's quite concerning, I think, to have so much content and the content being pulled down at the same time, and also thinking about our children who have gone through primary school with a very different curriculum and different expectations, who are now in Year 8 and will be expected to know this in 3 years' time, for example. So the other issue I think that we've got with this particular curriculum is that it's seems to be quite focused on memorization and not really focused on reasoning or investigating or any of those kind of mathematical process or practices that we know are really important for mathematics education.
Lovely. Thank you, Jodie. All right, we're going to move through now the summary snapshot document. Here we go. And I'll just run through, as again, this was contributed to by various other people. And I'll ask Jodie to chime in with her comment. So again, when you're looking at the survey document, it starts at question 5 because questions 1 to 4 are really about, who are you and where are you, and those kinds of administrative questions. And the survey questions are done on a sliding scale. So it's sort of, I strongly agree to I strongly disagree, that kind of multi-choice approach. But you do have the opportunity at the end of that. It's a very short survey, and maybe it's not asking the questions that you particularly want to answer. But you do have the opportunity at the end to add some other overarching feedback and to upload documents. So if you make notes on a Word document, you can upload that. And I would say, if you are going to do that, it's a good idea to hang on to that document as well, because I'm not sure how those things are being stored at present via the survey monkey. Okay, so question 5 is talking about the pathways visual. This is this image in the opening page of the curriculum document that sort of maps out which subjects you might want to choose in order to take you in whichever direction. And while the group felt that this was quite useful to have a pathways process, it doesn't seem to have to be necessarily very meaningful in practice at the moment, and very much orientated towards a kind of academic notion of mathematics and statistics for people who are going to go and pursue those subjects at university, or at least going through to that kind of academic line of theoretical mathematics. And I think there's an interesting thing around this, and that speaks to perhaps the lack of recognition of applied or vocational pathways that are contributed to by mathematics. And then this idea around the notion of Year 11 now being maths being a compulsory area for our learners, but also full of stuff. And much of that stuff seems to be geared towards more of those Year 12, 13 going forward, people who are going to go forward and studying mathematics specifically. Jodie, do you want to talk to that?
Yeah, sure. So, I thought the pathways visual is, I really liked that addition to the curriculum. I think it was really nice to see that and to see how mathematics can contribute to lots of different career pathways. But there's a huge gap between the pathways visual and thinking about those different career pathways and the mathematical content that's sitting in the curriculum, which, like you said, is quite got a heavy focus on kind of abstract algebra, for example, and we don't really see the types of mathematics, the applied types of mathematics that you would be using in a number of those career pathways represented within the curriculum content. And I think your second part there is making this as a compulsory kind of one-size-fits-all content heavy is going to create a lot of, I think, disenfranchisement from mathematics. I think students are going to be turned off taking mathematics, and actually it's probably going to end up having a lot of children who don't pass with the content as it is. So both of those kinds of things are really concerning. It's definitely a single academic pathway without thinking about the different ways that we use mathematics and the different purposes that we use mathematics for.
Lovely. Thank you, Jodie. And that kind of speaks, I think, to the next question, which is about the associated knowledge and practices. And again, that the group just said that they disagreed that this is what this section does, because it's only kind of partially representing that discipline. And I think this is probably something, Jodie, to talk to, is this idea around a balance of kind of being able to do a process as opposed to be able to have that depth of conceptual understanding. So you were talking before about reasoning and justification and why those things are super important and yet absent here.
Yeah, and actually it's really tied to children's mathematical achievement. So in research looking at what classroom practices teachers are using where children have good results in terms of mathematics testing and things like that, one of the things that we can see is that when teachers are explicitly asking children to explain mathematical ideas, to reason with mathematics, to justify their ideas, to generalise ideas, then we get better results in maths. What's concerning for me when I was looking through the practice statements is that I didn't see, and I may be wrong, I didn't do a line by line by line examination, but largely I thought that these ideas about explaining mathematical ideas, justifying, generalising mathematical ideas were absent, and instead it had a lot of identify, which is memorisation, and more. So identify or express were the kind of words that I kept seeing coming up again and again and again, and that really focuses on this kind of procedural knowledge, memorisation. Rather than having a balance between that and having conceptual understanding where you're having to use mathematical practices and investigate and problem solve and things like that. So I guess as a mathematics educator, we're not saying that memorisation, that there's no place for memorisation in terms of mathematics curriculum. Of course, there's things that we do need to memorise when we're learning mathematics, but this needs to be balanced with deep understanding and conceptual understanding as well. And it's interesting because at the very front of the document, it talks about mathematics being about both procedural and conceptual, procedural understanding and conceptual understanding. But then when you go into the strands and you look at the practices and the content that's sitting in there does not seem to be any balance between conceptual and procedural understanding. It seems heavily focused on the procedures and memorization.
Can I just ask, Jodie, if you could just talk that, because that interests me around the separation of the knowledges and the practices too, that kind of division.
Mm-hmm.
What that might do into technologies.
Yeah, I mean it's quite an artificial division, I think, too. Especially, I mean, I'm not going to talk to other subjects because I have taught other subjects, but I am a math specialist, so that's what I'm talking to. But it's a bit of an artificial division because, I mean, when we're talking about mathematics, how you show you know something is by doing it, if that makes sense. So then this kind of artificial separation between knowledge on one side and then practices on another side are, quite confusing. It makes it a little bit difficult also when you're looking at it. Like when I was looking through the content and thinking, there is a lot of content in here. It's also hard as a teacher to make sense of it when you've got a whole lot of content in one column over here and another whole lot of content, which sometimes maps across but sometimes doesn't, in the second column.
Right. The layout, as I said, not lending itself to how you weave those things together.
No, yeah, and I think this whole, as you've got there, this artificial division. So separating knowledge and practice is this artificial division. Somebody's just asking in the chat, I don't know if we can put a link in for the curriculum. Somebody's just asking where we can find the document that you're going through.
Okay.
Sorry.
I will put that in chat as usual.
Yeah, but so it is a completely artificial division to have knowledge over here and practice over somewhere else. It really should be connected together.
Okay, I'm going to put both. This is the one I'm just put there. That's the main site, and it's the if you click on, and then if you click on the button that says key issues at the top of this page, you'll get to the one. But I've put the straight link second.
I mean, I think the other issue with this is that what we could potentially breed is a whole lot of students who have memorised a whole lot of content to answer questions in an exam, but don't have the capability to apply it and to solve problems and to actually use it. And that's your kind of conceptual knowledge part. So that will then create issues in the future for future education, because when you're hitting, if you do decide to take mathematics or any career pathway that you go on where you need to use mathematics, you need to be able to apply it. So having all of this knowledge memorized isn't going to help our children in the future.
And it is that thing too, isn't it? That the transference of those things is not something that automatically happens.
No.
Oh, well, I did this thing over here, so I'm suddenly going to know the conceptual. If I don't understand the conceptual thing, you look at it as a completely separate
Absolutely.
Thing, not be able to
absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, this kind of leads quite nicely into questions about that description. And that the subject description, again, my participants just disagreed that it aligned well, because the subject description did talk about real world application and did talk about problem solving and did talk about, being foundational and for the all students. And then that kind of idea wasn't carried through into the rest of the content, and sort of what the everyday value might be about that. I also am interested in the kind of, I guess the aspiration is there, but then what's in the enactment. Jodie, can you talk about what you mean by the foundational intent?
Yeah, so I mean, if you're thinking about foundational, the meaning of that becomes really unclear. I would assume that foundational will be foundational for studying maths in a kind of further sense, or foundational for your career. What's the foundational knowledge that we want students to walk away from year 11 understanding about mathematics? That seems to it seems very unclear. Again, because I go to that we've got a lot of kind of high-level mathematics in there, which I wouldn't necessarily assume is foundational. So as another example, if you take fractions and decimals and percentages and things like that, and this is a disconnect too. So there's quite an emphasis on that at phase 4, and then when you hit phase 5, that's completely disappeared. So basically, under number and algebra, it had abstract algebra, and then it had this like financial mathematics, where it did have some, like you do see the percentages and decimals and things like that in this financial mathematics, but beyond the kind of financial situations, all the rest of that kind of understanding had disappeared out of the curriculum. So, yeah, I mean, it is unclear what this foundation idea means. And I think the other part of that too is numeracy. That seemed to have quite, disappeared quite strongly from the curriculum as well. So your kind of applied mathematics is gone.
Right. Okay. All right. So in terms of how this connects across to the learning that students will have done in phase 4.
Big disconnect, I thought. So, I mean, the content level I think is just too high, and it's a huge jump from phase 4 to year 11. I don't think that we're setting the students up to be able to succeed in year 11 mathematics when there's such a misalignment between what they're doing in year 9 and 10 and then what they're going to be doing in year 11 and the expectations for that. I also know the reality, a lot of high schools, my daughter's at high school, she has 4 maths periods a week. So how you could possibly get through all of the content that's in there and at such a higher level in 4 periods of maths a week is not really realistic either. I'm kind of looking at your statements, if that's all right as you go. Yeah. And I think that's...
Put it up, yeah.
yeah. I mean, this is another issue I had, and I talked to you this before we just started. So this prior knowledge assumption. We've just had the Curriculum Insight and Progress study, which said that I think it was 24% or something of students were at the appropriate level for year 8. And I think it was 64% of students were more than 1 year behind. And this is under the 2023 or 2024 curriculum, I lose which one it was, which isn't even as difficult as what they've put in the 2025 curriculum for year 8s. These are the same students who are going to be doing this now. So we're already saying 64% of them are more than 1 year behind. And now in 2.5 years, they're going to be doing this mathematics. Yeah. So how are we setting the children up to succeed? I'm assuming they'll probably use scaling in exams. So even though we'll have them all fail, they will be scaled up to pass, because I can't see that we're going to say 80% of children all failed maths at year 11. Sorry, I'm getting a bit cynical here. Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I do think this idea that's ambitious. It is ambitious, and a number of us have kind of called, particularly for, to maybe up the challenge a bit. And we're not saying that the previous curriculum was perfect or was really good or anything like that. I mean, it was what it was. But I think that this is just probably unrealistic in the level of mathematics for our classrooms. And I guess the other part I am concerned about as well is probably for our teachers, because I know in mathematics that we have mathematics teacher shortages. We've had a lot of out-of-field teachers who are teaching in our mathematics classrooms. And, this curriculum is going to also be problematic for teachers who are out-of-field teachers trying to teach this content, for sure. And I've noticed I'm on pages, and there's teachers who are teaching mathematics at the moment, who are teaching year 11 mathematics at the moment, who are saying, I'm not going to be able to teach this content.
Right.
Yeah. So this is creating lots of issues. I mean, it would be all well and good if we were taking a staggered approach and upping the levels, but doing it in a way where the children started with the new curriculum at year 1, and then by the time they got to year 11, they'd gone through the whole new curriculum. Maybe that would be helpful. Or, not or, and if we were really providing professional development for teachers to really come to terms with this curriculum, and providing really good, well-researched resources to help teachers teach this new curriculum, all of those kinds of things would be, supportive measures. But just kind of putting this out there is very problematic.
And I think what you're saying too about, this is a very content-heavy document, and it being more abstract and more theoretical, and not kind of like around the reasoning, around the things that you can apply across, that's transferable skills, or looking at real world contexts and being able to relate it to your life. That's, again, going to disconnect learners from this kind of content, making it that much harder for teachers, I guess, to hook students into it potentially.
Yeah, for sure. And I see this comment about it not being appropriate for diverse learners. And I think, we all know as teachers that we have children coming into our classrooms who have had lots of different experiences throughout their schooling, but also come in with lots of different strengths and lots of different kind of learning levels. And so having this kind of one size fits all is really problematic. Like I said, I've got 2 children. One of them's in year 8 at the moment. She's pretty average in terms of mathematics. And I looked at that and I was like, I even called my mother and said, I don't know what I'm going to do, because how on earth is she going to be expected to be doing this content in 2.5 years' time? It's and she's a child who's always, succeeded at mathematics at school. She's not failing maths, but I look at that and think, it's really going to cause more issues too, because I think, my conversation was, I'll probably have to get a tutor for her, but I can afford to do that. We have a whole lot of families who can't afford to do that, and that's, going to create more inequity.
As a public education system, putting content into the material, as you said, it's not resourced, and if the professional isn't there, pushing parents and families to have to seek other supports raises that equity issue, and isn't really what we're about. I wouldn't have thought as public school professionals. All right, question 9. Just tracking through the time. So I think the sequencing. All right, so we did talk a little bit about the transition from phase 4 into phase 5 at year 11, and this kind of increasing abstraction. Some stuff around the sequencing. The ideal conditions, I thought was interesting. This idea that, you would have this consistency around the learning process, and how that's going to implement across. Do you have anything to chip in on that one?
Yeah, and I think it's, like the sequencing is quite problematic. There's it's logic in some parts, it's not in other parts. Totally agree with that sudden increase in abstraction. I've seen other teachers noting things like the modelling courses have 11 different types of knowledge of models to teach. Currently, that's kind of, that's a lot, and 9 of them in a year 12, but then don't have any follow-up in year 13. So, so you've got those kinds of, sequencing, which seems to be misaligned between different courses and different year levels as well. So, and if you think about on average how many topics you would typically teach in maths across a year, usually it's probably about 6 or 7, and we're talking about 11 different types of models with 9 in year 12. So that's going to create a lot of overload.
Right. Okay. All right, things that I'm missing. In question 10, I think we've identified some of these already. The applied real world kind of practical numeracy stuff. The kind of clarity around the boundaries of those channels, the challenges that it's going to create for teachers. The differentiation and creating for learner pathways for students that are not going to go forward with maths, but this idea that this is, if this is the kind of maths that they go out into the world in, is it the most suitable content for those things? And as you said, that limited emphasis on the reasoning and the justification that I would think is kind of often when I'm trying to pitch maths to people who are not maths people, that's the bit that you get into.
Mm-hmm. Right? Yep, exactly. And I think this accessibility part is also an issue. So, I know many countries which are similar to ours have different pathways for mathematics, whether you call it foundational mathematics or functional mathematics or different names like that, which are like probably your kind of less algebra academic pathway of mathematics, but still give children opportunities to learn mathematics, which will then be useful for them in their career pathways.
Yeah, absolutely. My own maths experience there. All right. So last question on the survey is asking about inclusive and accessibility. And I think we've sort of covered that one a lot in terms of the demand. I mean, again, I don't like this academically wording. We've got to find a new one. But that uniform sort of standardization issue and what the entry points would be for that. As you said, students who are having to make this huge jump, even if they've, if they're doing, from just the jump between where they're supposed to be at phase 4, and that's only accepting, I guess, that they are at the point that it suggests they would be at phase 4. The limit in terms of flexibility and that there is some acknowledgement that the structure and the pathway might be good for some learners, that might be useful for those. But fitting into this kind of narrow profile of what a maths learner looks like.
Yeah, and I personally think that having a curriculum with more detail in it is useful. It was one of my big criticisms of the previous curriculum. It didn't have enough detail in the curriculum, and you had to go to lots of different resources to try and work out what exactly, to unpack it and work out exactly what it was asking you to teach. So I think that's helpful, but we've got to have the right stuff in there. That's well leveled, that's coherent, that's carefully developed, that's kind of benchmarked. And I don't think that's what we have. So although it's good to have a curriculum with more detail and that kind of structure, when you've got a curriculum which has got huge jumps between year levels and discontinuation of some mathematical topics and then picking up of others, that can create problems.
Okay, I can see 5 o'clock is quickly approaching, so I'm just going to go to my summary. Okay, so it has got more structure. It's very ambitious in its expectations. Content heavy. We're concerned about this narrowing and this kind of abstract, mathematical sort of abstract removed from real world business. A lack of coherence and progression in places, as you said, it's a bit patchy. Limited recognition of how we apply our mathematics. That idea that we're going to do some processes, but not necessarily develop the depth of understanding about why we're applying those processes to something, and this idea that it's assuming a strong basis of prior knowledge has already been attained. So it is that content load, the sequencing, and the accessibility, I think, that remain a big problem. I'm going to ask you, Jodie, to do a 1-minute quick fire summary, and then I will close out with our karakia. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. I think I'm not sure of the rationale of introducing Year 13 mathematics into Year 11. I've not seen any evidence that that's a helpful approach. I think that we would be better to retain more connections to, the kind of mathematics which is applicable for lots of different students, but actually develop that deep understanding of it rather than having so much content that's been having to be covered so quickly. We would be better to reduce the content and teach that really well and have students who have got very solid understanding of that rather than sweeping over a broad range of things but only with very surface level understanding. And I do find that kind of confusing when this is focused on this idea of science of learning. From my understanding, that the science of learning is supposedly related to mastery and being able to understand concepts deeply and things like that, but instead in this case it's being used to drive a curriculum which has masses of content and that students are only being asked basically to memorize. Well, because that's all there's space for.
Yeah, and that, as you say, that's the tricky thing, isn't it? You've pushed the space for other things with this approach and pushing teachers into particular ways of doing things by virtue of they just don't have time or opportunity to do others. Okay, well, thank you everyone who's joined us this afternoon for the session. As ever, it will all go up on the Substack very shortly. It will all go back on the web pages that I've got as well. And, if you know someone who would benefit from watching it, please make them aware. We will have another session, more sessions next week, looking at the health part of the health and PE curriculum that came out in Group 1 and looking at some of the subjects that came out from the social sciences as well. Thank you to Jodie for her wonderful contribution. Kia tātou rangamerie, kia runga i ngā iwi o te ao. Let your peace reign all of us this evening. Go forward and have a peaceful and calm Wednesday evening. Ka kite.
Ka kite.